The cold wind howled through the streets of Seoul, carrying with it the scent of winter's last breath. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, landing on the shoulders of a young woman in a faded gray cleaning uniform. Yoon Hanul, a 24-year-old cleaner, pulled her scarf tighter around her neck as she hurried down the street. She had just finished another grueling shift at Jang Corporations, the biggest conglomerate in South Korea, scrubbing the pristine marble floors that no one ever noticed. She was used to being invisible. But that night, fate had other plans. Just as she was about to cross the street, she saw an elderly woman standing in the cold, confused, her silk hanbok rustling in the wind. The woman turned in circles, mumbling incoherent words, her frail frame trembling. Hanul's heart clenched. She had seen this before. The subtle flicker of panic in the woman's eyes, the way she hesitated as if the world around her no longer made sense. It brought back memories she had buried deep. Without hesitation, Hanul scanned the woman's body language, the slight fidgeting with her hands, the lost expression, the way she avoided making direct eye contact, classic signs of early confusion. She knew exactly what to do. Slowly, she approached, keeping her voice low and soothing. "Halmiani, grandmother, are you all right?" The woman turned to her, eyes searching, and then, recognition. "Ah, Hanul, it's you," she said, her voice trembling but filled with warmth. Hanul blinked in confusion. She recognized the woman, not as the chairwoman of Jang Corporations, but as the kind old lady she had spoken to every now and then. They had shared casual conversations, brief moments of warmth, and passing smiles in the tea house she sometimes visited after work. But she had never once imagined that the kind, soft-spoken woman was connected to her tyrant of a boss. What Hanul didn't know was that Jang Sunja had deliberately kept her identity a secret. She had quickly realized that the young cleaner held nothing but disdain for her grandson, Jang Seo-jun. And she had been amused. If Hanul had known the truth, she likely would have kept her distance. But by allowing herself to be seen only as a lonely old woman who enjoyed tea, she had gained something precious, a true, unfiltered friendship. One that had nothing to do with power, business, or wealth. Hanul stilled. The woman knew her name. She hesitated before smiling, brushing it off as a lucky guess. After all, she often spoke with elderly customers at the local market. Perhaps she had met her there. But she had no time to think about that now. The woman was lost, confused, and alone. "Do you know where your home is?" "Let me help you," Hanul said gently. Hanul never expected that one small act of kindness would change her life forever. The woman she had helped turned out to be Jang Sunja, the chairwoman of Jang Corporations and the grandmother of her ruthless, workaholic boss, Jang Seo-jun. She first suspected something when she escorted the old woman home, finding herself in front of a towering estate that seemed almost too grand for an ordinary elder. The staff at the entrance rushed toward them, calling the woman Madam Jang with panic expressions, their eyes darting between Hanul and their employer's grandmother. But the truth became clear when she saw the family portrait hanging in the grand hall, the very same cold, unapproachable face of Jang Seo-jun staring back at her from an older photo, standing beside the very woman she had just helped. Her stomach dropped. You're the CEO's grandmother," she whispered, unable to hide the shock in her voice. Jang Sunja simply smiled. "I wondered how long it would take you to realize." Hanul's head spun. If the grandmother had known her, why had she never said anything before? And why did she seem amused by all of this? The truth was, Hanul and Jang Sunja had already known each other for some time. Every week, on her way home from work, Hanul would stop by a quiet little tea house to unwind. And every week, she would find the same elderly woman there, Jang Sunja. What Hanul hadn't known was that Jang Sunja wasn't just a regular customer, she was the owner of the shop. Her late husband had loved tea, and after his passing, she had opened the tea house in his memory, filling it with the same warmth and tranquility they had once shared. It was a piece of her past that she could still hold on to, a place where love lingered in every cup poured. Hanul only discovered the truth because of this incident. Hanul's breath caught in her throat. She had always wondered, why would a wealthy woman frequent a simple tea house when she could afford the most expensive teas in the world? Now, it all made sense. The tea house hadn't been about luxury, it had been about love, about holding on to something real. And she had been a part of it without even realizing. The old woman had never introduced herself formally, always insisting that she was just an old lady who liked tea. They had formed an unexpected friendship, bonded by warm cups of tea and quiet conversations. Hanul had confided in her, venting about her job, about her cruel boss, the arrogant Jang Seojun, without ever knowing that this woman was his grandmother. And Jang Sunja? She had never corrected her. She had listened, nodding along as Hanul ranted, secretly amused. She had known exactly who Hanul was all along. But she also knew that if Hanul had discovered the truth, she would have run. And Jang Sunja didn't want that. She wanted to know this kind-hearted girl who spoke with fire in her eyes, the girl who was fearless in the face of power. And now, fate had forced their worlds to collide in a way neither had expected. What had drawn Jang Sunja to Hanul in the first place was something far deeper than their conversations. She had seen the way Hanul lived, modestly, humbly, yet content. The young woman never had much, but what little she had, she always shared. Whenever they sat for tea, Hanul would bring something, small things, a homemade rice bowl, a piece of warm bread, a simple flower she had picked on her way. "For you, Halmiani. I saw this and thought of you," she would say with a bright smile. It had been such a stark contrast to Jang Sunja's own children. Her own family, who had been born into privilege, had everything but were never satisfied. They had wealth, status, power, yet all they did was fight for more, never once content with what they had. Hanul, on the other hand, had so little yet never asked for anything. That was what made her different. The night was eerily quiet in the grand estate when Seojun found himself lingering in the dimly lit hallway. He hadn't meant to stay so late, but something kept him from leaving. He turned a corner and spotted Hanul sitting on the stairs, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring off into nothing. "You look like you're about to run away," he said, leaning against the railing. Hanul blinked up at him, startled. "Should I?" A smirk played on his lips. "I wouldn't blame you," she scoffed, shaking her head. "And here I thought you were going to try to convince me to stay." "I haven't decided yet if I want you to stay or not," he teased, crossing his arms. "You seem to have a habit of turning my world upside down." She rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. "I didn't do anything. Your grandmother did." Seojun sighed, his expression softening. "Yeah, she always had a way of seeing through people." He leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling for a moment before speaking again. "She was the only real family I had. My mother, she only ever cared about appearances. To her, I wasn't her son, I was an extension of the family name. A tool for prestige. I grew up learning how to stand properly at events before I ever learned how to ride a bike. My uncle was no different. He was obsessed with power, constantly scheming for more. But Halmiani, she actually raised me. She tucked me in at night. She made me breakfast. She taught me how to be human in a house full of people who only cared about status." Hanul's heart ached at his words. She had never imagined the cold, ruthless CEO she had once despised had been just a lonely boy, growing up in a house that never truly felt like home. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. She loved you. And she must have been so proud of you. He scoffed lightly, though his fingers tightened around hers. I don't know about that. I spent most of my life pushing people away, thinking that was the only way to survive. But she always told me, one day, you'll meet someone who reminds you that life isn't just about winning. It's about who's there with you when you lose. Hanol smiled softly. She was smart. Seo Jun turned his head to look at her, a teasing glint in his eyes. Yeah. Which is probably why she liked you so much. Hanol rolled her eyes but couldn't help but grin. Are you saying I'm smart or that I'm a nuisance like her? He smirked. Both. She gasped dramatically, placing a hand over her heart. You wound me, Mr. CEO. His smirk widened. Oh please, we both know you love it. Their playful banter always filled the quiet hallway in the upcoming days. Hanul came by every day to spend time with grandmother and always ended the visits with moments with Jang Seo-jun. Something was growing between them that neither of them had expected. And as Hanul looked into his eyes, she realized something else. She wasn't afraid anymore. A silence fell between them before he finally spoke again, his voice quieter. She talked about you, you know. Long before I knew who you were. Hanul furrowed her brows. What do you mean? Seo Jun hesitated before sitting down beside her. She told me once that she met someone. Someone who made her feel seen. Someone who reminded her what kindness looked like. I didn't understand at the time, but now, I do. She was talking about you. Hanul's breath hitched. She never told me she knew who I was. He chuckled. She was sneaky like that. For the first time, Hanul saw the weight of exhaustion in his eyes, the pain of watching someone he loved slip away piece by piece. Without thinking, she reached out, placing a hand over his. It's hard, isn't it? Watching them forget? Seojun's fingers twitched beneath hers. Yeah. She swallowed, debating whether to say it. But he had been honest with her, so she decided to do the same. My mom had it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dementia? I was young, but I still remember the way she looked at me one day, like I was a stranger in our own home. Seo Jun turned to her, surprise flickering in his eyes. I hated it, she continued. But I also learned how to be patient. How to meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. Your grandmother, she had good days and bad ones, but she always knew you loved her. That's what matters. Seo Jun stared at her for a long moment before a slow smile tugged at his lips. You're not as annoying as I thought. Hanul smirked. And you're not as heartless as I thought. He scoffed, shaking his head. Careful, you're starting to like me. She gasped dramatically. That would be a tragedy. Their laughter echoed in the empty hallway, a brief moment of light in the midst of all the darkness they had been walking through. And in that moment, something shifted between them, something unspoken but understood. Seo Jun wasn't just her arrogant boss anymore. And Hanul wasn't just the cleaning lady who had stumbled into his world. They were something more. Jang Sunja's health deteriorated rapidly. One evening, she took Hanul's hand in hers and whispered, no matter what happens, don't be afraid. And then, she was gone. Her death shook the entire family. But the biggest shock came when her will was read. The estate lawyer cleared his throat. Jang Sunja has left a significant portion of her assets to Jang Seo-jun. Expected. The CEO and beloved grandson. But then. And another significant portion to Yoon Hanul. The room erupted. Seojun's mother slammed her fist on the table. This is a mistake. A mere cleaning girl, how could she? She must have tricked her. My mother was sick, she didn't know what she was doing. But the lawyer remained unfazed. Madame Jang was of sound mind when she made these decisions. Her legal team reviewed everything months before her condition worsened. Seojun's uncle scoffed. You expect us to believe that she willingly handed over part of her fortune to some nobody? The lawyer cleared his throat, pulling out another document. Madame Jang left detailed letters, explaining her decisions. Would you like to hear her exact words? The room fell into tense silence before he continued. I have lived a life surrounded by wealth, yet the happiest moments I have spent in my later years were with a young woman who had none of it. Seojun's mother clenched her fists as the lawyer read on. I have given my children everything, and still, they hunger for more. But Hanul? She has nothing, yet she shares all that she has. She has never asked me for a single thing, never sought anything but a conversation and a warm cup of tea. A thick tension filled the air. Seojun's uncle's face darkened, while his mother looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. Because the words cut deep. Their mother, the woman they had barely visited, had found solace not in them, but in a cleaning girl. Then, another bombshell dropped. Madame Jang and Miss Yoon Hanul knew each other long before her illness progressed, the lawyer added, adjusting his glasses. She made this decision when she was fully aware of what she was doing. The family fell silent. Seojun's mother paled, her rage shifting to unease. What do you mean, they knew each other? The lawyer nodded. They had a personal relationship outside of this family. They met regularly at a tea house for months. Madame Jang left detailed letters expressing her reasons for this inheritance. She wanted Miss Yoon to be taken care of, because in her own words, she was the only person in her life who cared for her as just a woman, not as a chairwoman. Seojun's gaze flickered toward Hanul, who was still sitting in stunned silence. She planned this all along, he muttered under his breath, realization settling in. His grandmother had anticipated everything. She had known how his family would react, how they would turn against Hanul, and she had ensured that when the time came, she would not be left defenseless. His uncle, face twisted with barely contained rage, spat, she manipulated her. This girl, this nobody, she fooled an old woman into giving her our inheritance. But Hanul sat there, frozen in shock. I didn't know, she whispered, looking at Seojun. I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this. Seojun's gaze was unreadable. He was staring at her, at the will, at the family that had turned against her in an instant. And then, he laughed. Because suddenly, everything made sense. He had heard his grandmother speak about someone before, a girl she had met, someone she admired. Someone she said was more kind than anyone in their world of power and greed. She reminds me of what love should look like, Seojun. Not the kind that is bought, not the kind that is negotiated, but the kind that simply exists because it is real. At the time, he had dismissed it as another one of her poetic musings. But now, standing here, he realized the truth. Hanul was the girl his grandmother had spoken about. The girl who had unknowingly left an imprint on the most important person in his life. His heart clenched. How had he not seen it sooner? It was a dry, bitter laugh. Of course, he muttered under his breath. Even in death, she's still 2 steps ahead of us. Because Seojun understood exactly what his grandmother had done. She had seen the greed in her family. She had seen how they would turn on Hanul the moment she was no longer alive to protect her. She had also seen how none of them had ever truly cared for her. Not once had her children sat with her in quiet companionship the way Hanul had. Not once had they brought her something without expecting something in return. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her own blood had abandoned her, while a stranger had given her the warmth of family. So she had given her a weapon, power. She trusted you more than her own blood, Seo Jun said quietly, watching Hanul with something unreadable in his eyes. And now, they have no choice but to respect you. As the cherry blossoms bloomed outside their home, Hanul stood by Seojun's side, her fingers intertwined with his. The wind carried the soft scent of spring, petals drifting around them like nature's quiet blessing. They had lost much, family, security, the illusion of stability, but in return, they had gained something greater. Each other. Seo Jun squeezed her hand gently. Do you regret it? Any of it? Hanul looked up at him, a soft smile playing at her lips. If I had known where this road would take me, I would have still walked it. Even if it meant all the pain, all the struggle, because it led me to you. His eyes softened, his usual stoic expression breaking just a little. You were never supposed to be part of my world. But now, I can't imagine it without you. She chuckled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. Seo Jun exhaled a quiet laugh. She always did. And as they stood together beneath the cherry blossoms, they understood this was only the beginning. Because sometimes, love isn't about where you start. It's about who's willing to fight for you until the end.